Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name is Thomas. I hope you are all well. We're back with another video on the channel today. We're going to be talking about the annual general meeting that occurred a few days ago now, joined by, of course, our own Terry McAllister and a very special guest as well. You've almost definitely heard about him on Everton Twitter, the S, or, well, we won't be calling him that during the video. We will be calling him Paul. So, Paul, thanks for coming on. How are you doing today?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you guys.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on. Terry, how are you as well? I feel like I've just skipped straight past you.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Nod to Paul's Talking the Blues podcast there with the brothers Costigan. Yeah, I'm good.
Brilliant. So we will make a start then. Just kind of, Paul, I'll just come to you first. Talk about your general thoughts about the meeting. Of course, if you haven't all checked out Paul's article already, we'll definitely link it in the description. Do check it out. It seems that you were slightly underwhelmed at maybe the substance of the meeting in general.
I think, to be fair to the club, first of all, it's difficult because clearly everything was pre-recorded. It wasn't really a meeting in that sense. I mean, it was a piece of propaganda by the club. At the end of the day, they said what they wanted to say and they presented themselves in the manner in which they think is the best manner, which is clearly what anybody would do in the same circumstances. So as a piece of objective reporting about what the club has done, apart from perhaps the figures, because there's not much you can do with the figures are what the figures are. I didn't think it was either that objective, nor did I really think, to be honest, given the amount of time that they had to prepare it, that it was the best representation of what the club's about and what the club does.
Yeah, Terry, what were your general, just initial thoughts about what emerged from the meeting and how it was presented in general?
Well, I think Paul's got it in one. It was propaganda, really, wasn't it? I think they've looked and thought there's not a lot of good news we can give. It's not all bad news, obviously, but they've looked at the different compartmentalised segments of it where, obviously Denise, Marcel Brands, Sasha Rozantsev and Bill, and every single part of their aspect of the presentation, they just sort of clawed at what can we talk about. There's no good news on the stadium, not really their fault, entirely their fault because it's still planning permission. The squad size isn't down to what Marcel wanted to be, which he outlined last year. Financial side of things, it's pretty much the same, isn't it? A record-breaking commercial deal, but wages to turnover is still grim, frankly. And then obviously there was a little bit at the end with Bill Kenwright where he's asked about the quality of the board, which was just harkening back to the old days of Bill Kenwright when it was like something that one of Donald Trump's press secretaries would say. This was the biggest inauguration ever, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, we've got the best board ever. It's revered across, the Premier League and what have you. So it was just trying to put a positive spin on anything. Like, I think at one point they said there's going to be more Evertonians at the club because they might have just thought, well, people seem to like Leighton Baines. Let's say we're going to do more of that. People will be happy about that, and woefully have misread the mood of supporters. I think they're very lucky that the team's doing well, to be bluntly honest.
Yeah, it was a slightly disappointing presentation in general. It didn't. Sorry, as Paul mentioned, it wasn't really like an objective presentation of any information by any means. And as Terry said there, just maybe something more of a propaganda. I mean, I can see why they've tried to do it that way. It has been a fairly bleak year, but you think maybe it would reflect the success they've had on the pitch, that they would maybe, take that into their stride with the general meeting, which they didn't really at all. But I wasn't too surprised at the way they kind of presented the information, purely because of, I mean, from a financial perspective, I'm not going to go too much into it. That's definitely what I'm going to come to you two next, because I'm not too knowledgeable on that matter. And there's only so many positive spins you can put on that, or you can only present the positive information in general. So, Paul, for a man like myself who really doesn't know much about finance in terms of football clubs at all, I mean, I can look at sponsorship, stuff like that. How are things looking? Was it surprising? Was it what you expected to see in general?
Just before I answer that, just to go back to the points that the three of us just made, I think I think most Evertonians would like to be treated as adults, and we know it's a really tough time. It's a tough time for almost everybody, in terms of how we're trying to run our lives, emotionally for some people because of the circumstances that they're in. But from a commercial point of view, we all understand it's difficult, and we can all see that Goodison Park has been empty since March. We all know that extremely well. So just do it like as it is. You don't have to spin it for us. We're not shareholders in the sense of like being shareholders of Marks and Spencers or Sainsbury's or whatever. If I don't like if I'm a Marks and Spencer's shareholder and I don't like Marks and Spencers, I can just sell the shares. Or if I don't like what the CEO is saying, I can just sell the shares. I don't have an emotional attachment to that, but I do have an emotional attachment to Everton. And they're going to have to say something really pretty bad in the meeting for me to want to sell my Everton shares. And probably almost every one of the 1,400 shareholders would hold the same view. And it's that lack of recognition of who they're talking to that sort of worries me, that they don't get that we're actually there to support them because we all want a better football club. And you just be honest with us. That's all I'm asking for. So anyway, sorry, that a little bit over. In terms of the finances, obviously very difficult for a number of reasons. Difficult because we lost revenue that we thought we were going to get. So the revenue from not playing games in front of fans at Goodison, some of the broadcasting revenue we didn't get for two different reasons. One, because there's a rebate that has to be paid back because the season didn't finish on time. And secondly, because the season didn't finish on time, some of the games fell out of the financial year. So the financial year end was the end of June. And therefore, the revenue that was attached to the games that were played after the 30th of June couldn't be included in this year's accounts. So you see the revenue fall by quite a bit. And I think Sasha said around 30 odd million, the revenue fell by because of the season going over the end of the financial year. But on the flip side, there was £30 million of revenue from USM in terms of the Bramley Moore Stadium. That's a complete one-off. It won't be repeated, and it wasn't expected. So revenue was about flat. The problem the club has is that, frankly, we just spend too much money for the amount of money that we earn. We're like a family or an individual that just has a budget bigger than their monthly income. And when that happens, you know what happens. You start using credit cards, you start using overdrafts until such a point as you can't use them anymore. And that's the thing that we have to address, really. Getting our costs down, which means getting rid of players that aren't productive where we can. But again, I understand the difficulties in doing that because, as nice a guy as he is, if you're Balassi and you're on a contract that you're not going to get anywhere else, why on earth would you move? I mean, he has a responsibility. You could argue he might have a responsibility to the club, but ultimately he has a greater responsibility to himself. So why would he move? But nevertheless, wages are too high, and the amortization costs that we carry are too high for the amount of revenue that we have. The other question then is, well, how can we increase revenue? And we can increase revenue realistically two different ways. One, by being better in terms of our commercial activities, so having more partners and getting those partners to spend more money with us, or by generating money from selling players. They're effectively the two options that are open to us. Mashiri writing a cheque for £50 million a year stops the bank manager from getting worried, but it doesn't do anything about our profitability. And that's, I think he's coming to that realization that he can't continue to write £50 million checks every year for two reasons. One, probably he doesn't want to do that. And secondly, from an FFP point of view and Premier League regulatory point of view. It was interesting, Sasha said that we met the Premier League regulations in terms of how much our losses have been over the last 3 years. And looking at the figures, I can see how we got to that point. Had we been in Europe, I don't think there's any way that we could have got through FFP, because FFP is much more stringent than the Premier League regulations. And I think if we do qualify for Europe at the end of this season, it's going to be an issue for us. Now, he did say again, he said that they're in regular conversations with UEFA, and UEFA understand where we're at. And that's good, and it's sensible to do that. But ultimately, if we're only allowed to lose 30 million euros over a 3-year period, and we've lost something like £250 million over that period, then obviously there's a big difference between the two, and it can't just be explained away.
Yeah, it certainly feels like we've had, I mean, especially in the Mashiri era as well, a few years of this. I mean, we are still just making a loss. We're spending too much in theory, and we are just being bankrolled by Mashiri. And of course, again, as we mentioned before, it is a tricky financial year, but it seems the same, year on year that we are. I mean, we're cutting down the squad size, but I mean, we're not paying, Sandro Ramirez anymore, players like that. I mean, I don't know what he was getting paid at the club during his time, but stuff like that it seems to be the same message that we're getting every year, no matter how much they'd like to sugarcoat it this year, or, for example, because I haven't watched the past few years anyway, apart from, obviously when Marcel Brands came up with his presentation about needing a right winger and a centre half and everything. But it does seem like, even as much as they like to sugarcoat it this year, we're still in the same situation as we have been for a few years. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Terry.
Yeah, I mean, I could just ask Paul, the financial fair play aspect, the European, obviously, model. I've always wondered if, because it's a rolling 3-year sort of period that they look at. Next summer, the Koeman Walsh sort of season, summer of mistakes, basically, that would come off the rolling 3-year period. Now, I'm not imagining that would have the impact of bringing it down to 30 million euros losses, but could you imagine that they're sort of waiting on that white horse to arrive, and suddenly we'll look a lot better because we'll have the drag factor of that summer. It won't be taken into the account when they look at our finances if we qualify for Europe. Is there any chance of that? Or
to an extent, yes. But the problem we've got is that our financial performance has got worse year by year. So dropping a year off, which was not great, but actually was better than the year that you're now bringing in, actually makes your net position worse. So because
we were in Europe that year, I imagine, and what have you.
Yeah. So our financial performance in 17-18 was better, or is going to be better than our performance in 2021. I think, ultimately, I suspect what happens is that we get some sort of penalty from UEFA. I don't think it's going to be a position where UEFA say, sorry, we're not going to give you a license to play either in the Champions League or in the Europa League, depending on which one we qualify for. I think we either take a fine or we take a restriction on squad numbers in European games, or even possibly we might have to take some form of transfer restrictions. But I just think they're taking the view that we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah. That's sort of similar to what happened to AC Milan, although they took a big gamble after that. They got a warning and only really got a ban after they
chose to ignore it.
They carried on regardless. But we're not at that stage, so there's a possibility we're telling them now to say, you're gonna have to slap our wrist if we get there, but we're going to be good boys from now on.
Yeah, I think the issue possibly is not so much UEFA's attitude towards us. It's possibly the attitude of other clubs. So other clubs that maybe have been compliant and done sensible things and kept within the regulations, or kept much closer to the regulations than we have, I think legitimately have an argument to say, well, hang on a minute, just a bit like what clubs have been saying in the Championship, with Derby County and Sheffield Wednesday, for example. It's one thing to break the rules, but if you're going to break the rules to take advantage of me, I'm going to complain about the fact that you've done that. And I just wonder about how many clubs will raise objections, and clubs with far more influence in Europe than we have will raise objections if, as and when we qualify for Europe.
Yeah, there's other things to go into from the meeting, like the stadium. I don't want to go into the stadium too much because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of news, and that's all planned permission rather than finances. But something I do want to ask you, Paul. Obviously, as you mentioned, we need to improve our revenue. That's basically just the bottom line of it. We can't just keep getting bankrolled by Moshiri. And it seems very simple, but obviously the transfers of players like James Rodriguez, there seems to be a big shift in the kind of international strategy, and whether that's South America, we saw things in Miami. Kind of looking ahead to next year's AGM, do you think that'll have a significant effect? Will it have a smaller effect than maybe some are hoping for?
It's difficult to see how it's going to have a significant effect financially, I'm afraid to say, because whilst we generated a lot of interest, and I think our number of social media followers have increased, and we've signed a deal with a betting company in Colombia, there's no real mechanisms to generate cash from those activities. So I don't know what the betting company in Colombia will be paying. A couple of million pounds a year, perhaps, something of that size, which is obviously very welcome, but it's not earth-shattering. It's not going to change much in terms of the overall finances of the club. The deal that we have with Fanatics makes it difficult for us to expand naturally. We have to, the manner in which we expand commercially has to fit in with Fanatics' strategy as much as it does with us. If they haven't got a big presence in Colombia, or if they want to put their resources elsewhere, if they want to put their resources, I don't know, into Miami, for example, just as a case, we're always competing with other clubs because we outsource. So it's difficult to see immediately how we generate more cash from those activities, I'm afraid. That's not to say that we shouldn't be doing it and that we shouldn't be looking to expand the range of commercial partners that we have. Clearly, we need to do that. But it's a bit of a slow burn. It's not going to sort of massively change things. The thing that changes everything is qualification for the Champions League. If we do manage to stay in or get into the top four and stay there for the end of the season, not only do we generate a lot of cash from the Champions League, 40, 50, 60 million pound, because we would be guaranteed qualification for the group stage. It does make us much more attractive then to other commercial partners. So perhaps the big strategy should be, let's focus the resources on the pitch and see if we can get in the Champions League. But also, in preparation for that, the people that run the commercial department, Sasha Ryazantsev and others, beating hell out of the phones, talking to every organisation they can think of to say, if we do get Champions League qualification, we're going to be knocking on your door for a sponsorship arrangement. Not leaving it till the point where we've got the qualification. Let's be doing that work now.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up sponsorship. That's something they completely left out of the AGM, was this, phantom sleeve sponsor, which still hasn't been filled. It's obviously a minor issue, but I'm sure they put out in December that they were talking to a organisation and they were, progressing well with them, and it's completely gone quiet. So I know a lot of that's to do with, the depressed, market with, COVID-19 and whatever. But that seems to have gone completely quiet as well. Like maybe they're hanging the latch. I don't know, waiting for the right offer. That we've still not got a sleeve sponsor, and it's just the sort of, it's another way of making money which has gone away and not been replaced.
Yeah, I mean, they indicated to me a little bit before Christmas that they've got interested, or they've got people that are interested, and people that would do a deal today, but not at a price the club wants. So the club are taking the view that we'd rather forego the income and get a better deal, either if the economic situation improves because we're moving towards the end of the pandemic, or if, as we were just talking about a few minutes ago, if we do happen to qualify for Champions League, then obviously that becomes a bit of a game changer in terms of how attractive the shirt sleeve is to potential sponsors.
Well, just on that then, when you say about the massive impact that Champions League would have, it's obviously quite a popular sentiment amongst a lot of supporters, especially on social media, that we should be doing everything we can in this transfer window to sort of make take our chance to get in the top four. Now, I've heard, you described it on your other podcast, I'm not sure which one, I think it might have been Business Matters, that the club has already been behaving like a championship club, sort of throwing everything on black, trying to get in, to get into the Premier League, where in our case it's the Champions League. Do you think there's any way that do you think that the club would be saved now to try and do that once more with the best opportunity they've got? Or do you think moving away from that sort of behaviour is the best long-term strategy? Because if it doesn't happen, you're back, you're back in the same boat. Are they even able to do that with the finances the way they are?
I think there's a big question mark over our ability to do it, even if we wanted to do it. They talked. Sasha Razantsev talked about cash flow. What he didn't say, they talked about the net debt position. I think they said it was like just less than £3 million, which sounds great. But in June there was £58 million of debt to Rights and Media Funding and to Metro Bank, which really didn't get a mention. And also, we didn't pay our tax bill last year, which is perfectly legitimate. And the government said, as part of their strategy to help businesses, if you've got an outstanding tax bill, don't worry about it. It's not the thing that you need to worry about at this moment in time if cash flow is an issue for the business. So we've got big calls on cash. We've got another £11 million to spend on the stadium, regardless of whether we get planning permission or not. So there's all of these costs that are still coming out of the business, even though the revenues are, the revenues this year are going to be £30 million less than they were last year, because we don't have that 30 million that came from USM, or at least we don't yet have anything to compare with that. So genuinely, I think it's really difficult for the club to, even if they wanted to spend a lot of money in this transfer window, even if, quite rightly, you could argue, if we're close to Champions League, then it's soft to stop now, stop rolling the dice now. But frankly, I don't think we can. The other point is that if the stadium is very close, and if planning permission is close in the next couple of months, we've got to address the lenders to the stadium before the end of the financial year, and they will already be very concerned about the underlying strength of the business. There's a business case for building the stadium, and we know it will generate enough cash to meet the financing costs. That's fairly well established. But if the underlying business is still losing lots of money, the lenders will be concerned about that. So I think that's another factor which wasn't mentioned in the meeting, that would suggest that we're not going to do any business at all.
Yeah. So the ideal scenario would be finishing the Champions League with the players you've got, and/or sell a player for massive profit, basically.
Yeah, the get out of jail card is selling Richarlison. Not that makes any sense from a footballing point of view, but from a financial point of view, it would do. If we didn't qualify for the Champions League, and there was still these financial pressures on the club, then that's an option. I don't think it's an option anybody would want. Obviously, no fan would want it, and I suspect the club doesn't want it. But who knows? Who knows what deal we've got with Richarlison? I know that they had talks in the summer, and it was very clear that we were going to get pushed for Europe this year, which is clearly something that Richarlison wants. But I don't know.
Yeah. So
and then, sorry, go on, Terry.
No, that was it.
Yeah, it's just to kind of round off as well, because there's more we can go into about the AGM, but I would encourage you all to go and read Paul's article or listen to his Business Matters podcast, which he does with a few others, because they go into a lot more detail about the different aspects, and I would encourage you all to listen to it. But the kind of underlying thing here, when we talk about finances and what a lot of people want to know about, is transfers. Of course, when we came into the summer window, things looked bleak. The club managed. I mean, there was different things that I don't know the intricacies of, whether it was the extension of deadline, stuff like that. We did manage to pull off one of the best transfer windows we've had in years, quite frankly, in some of the most difficult circumstances. And Marcel Brands mentioned that it was one of the weirdest windows, I think he referred to it as, and that looked like a bit of a rabbit out the hat. No one really saw it coming. This time, I mean, it does really seem like we are going to do nothing in January. Is that right, Paul?
I think so. I think, to be fair to the club, I know this sounds as if we're always coming across negative about the club, trying very hard not to. I think the club did really good business in the summer. I think both in terms of the prices that they paid for the players, but the players that they brought in, and clearly the Ancelotti effect is a big part of that. Although Brands did say that we'd wanted Doucouré for 3 years. It's interesting that if we did want him for 3 years, why we hadn't been able to get him in earlier. Again, that question wasn't answered, but certainly getting James in on a free is fantastic business. And the people I don't speak to many people on the football side, but the people I speak to on the football side that aren't at Everton Football Club, but there are other clubs, think that Alan is going to be one of the best buys that we've made in many years.
Yeah. It was a brilliant window as well. Yeah, go on, Terry.
Yeah.
No, I just completely agree with that. It especially looks better in comparison to some, other windows. It was a window where every move, was a good one, and I think just the club as a whole, things look better when you've got a good manager in place. It's something we haven't had, the right manager in place. We haven't had the right manager in place since probably the first season of Roberto Martinez, or even if you want to be harsher, back to David Moyes. Because now Ancelotti's made other business prior to his arrival look better. Suddenly, Alex Iwobi doesn't look like a bad buy anymore, and Michael Keane's seen as probably the number one defender at the club, and there's question marks about him beforehand. So if we can stay in that vein, we can sort keep some stability on the football side of things and start to make more of what we've got, then obviously that'll help on the financial side as well, because we'll be able to, we'll have to keep buying and buying and buying. We've been buying to replace players we bought 2 years ago. And
yeah, exactly.
So we can stop doing that and just buy to add, not buy to replace. That'll help everything.
It seemed like a window where there was absolutely no room for error, and it doesn't look like they seem to make any mistakes yet. I mean, touch wood, hope all the transfers carry on in the vein of form that they have had. Even Godfrey at the time, I mean, when he came in, I didn't know a lot about him. It did seem like quite a bit of money, but I mean, another brilliant acquisition. It seems like if there was ever somewhere where Marcel Brands had to get every deal absolutely right, it was this one, and he seems to have done so. And then just kind of the final point in the video here. I mean, how do we feel about doing no business in January? I'll come to you first, Harry. Do you feel like we've got a competitive enough squad to go on with the rest of the season and push for Europe, hopefully?
Yeah, I don't think there's a compelling case to do much business this January, even if all the financial side of things were rosy, because it is a buyer's market. But who could you point to out there who'd be released by their club and could make a massive difference here? I think it's we're onto a hiding for nothing if we go and try and buy in this window, and I don't think even normal Januaries have been very good historically for the club. So I think the view the manager takes as well is, I'm going to get Alan and James and Dean back in the team after coming through the whole of December without them, and that I hate the phrase and everyone else does, but they'll be like new signings going into one game a week again for the rest of the season. It might not take a new player, it might just take sticking with that consistency and that getting that team back together from the start of the season.
Yeah, I don't know if you agree with that, Paul. Are you quite happy with the general strength of the squad to hopefully end up qualifying at the end of the season for European football?
I'm happy with the first 11. I think most people would agree with that. That when we've got all of our players fit, we've got a fairly strong first 11. Certainly a first 11 that compete at the top end of the league. I think three things I'd like to say about Ancelotti. First of all, Terry, your point about him improving previous signings is a really valid point, and I agree with that totally. I think the difference in Iwobi has just been amazing. Everybody's always thought there's a player there, but nobody really knew how to get that player out on the pitch, and he's done that. Embarrassingly, I've just forgotten the last 2 points. So yeah, there's the three things about Iwobi, about Ancelotti is he's improved past players. I think his man management skills are fantastic, and that's that helps bring players in when we're in a position to bring players in. And I think the final point, and I don't think he gets enough credit for this, is his tactical awareness is just superb. He makes changes in games that really, really matter. And I can't sing his praises highly enough. It obviously an inspired acquisition to get him in the first instance. But I think we're really seeing the difference between a real master of his craft and a journeyman. And we've had too many journeymen sitting in the manager's seat, or people that just frankly shouldn't have been there. It really makes a difference to see a fantastic manager doing this stuff.
I completely agree, and I am conscious of time here, so that's the end of my questions. Terry, I don't know if you've got anything else you'd like to add.
No closing statements. I completely agree with everything Paul said about Ancelotti. I can't say enough nice things about him. He's something we need to build around, basically, like take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. So, kind of just in summary, finances, not surprising. We're still spending more than we seem to have without Mashiri bankrolling us, but we can definitely look up. We have a very strong squad. We've got an absolutely brilliant manager that's hopefully going to lead us to European football at the end of the season, and then in the next couple of years, hopefully the AGMs are less propaganda and more just talking about how brilliantly the club's doing, both financially and on the pitch. So that does bring us to the end of the video. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to Terry and Paul for joining us today, giving a lot of brilliant insight into things that I definitely don't know about, and I hope you all enjoy the video. And do check out Paul on Twitter, check out his Business Matters podcast, where he does go into more detail about some of the things that we haven't had time to discuss today. But thank you all very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.